And now we have a report from the ad hoc committee, the B policy revisions, and I'm going to turn over to Dr. Guyton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we've had the opportunity to meet now twice, I believe. And so really the first meeting was kind of designed around idea of vision, and that's obviously when we came back to the board and said, hey, as we look at these B policies or look at that individual policy, there's so much bleed over to the other policies, and this really may be a good opportunity for us to take this as a lump sum and begin to dive in a different format than I think what previous boards have done to get a little more granular on the policy development. And so, of course, we came to the board with that and was duly appointed by the board to do so. As we began to lay the roadmap for the B policies, we really had to create a framework or a structure. That framework really set to answer three questions. What do we do and how do we do it? Because really, if you look at the board policies from a 30,000-foot view, that's really the questions that the B policies seek to answer. And then obviously there's a little potpourri at the end. So we really kind of designed a framework and structure around that, and with the help of Ms. Halliday, we began to group those policies in such a way that address those very things. More than likely, for example, who we are as a board, that consisted of, help me out, I want to say, where am I looking? Here we are. I want to say roughly probably 10 or 12 policies that are inclusive within that. And that's really a lot to bite off at one time. It would be a lot to bring to the board at one time. And so we felt more confident in grouping those into subsets, maybe 4 or 5, and some of these may even be condensed to a single policy. And given the opportunity to the board to digest these recommendations and changes. And so that's the framework that we sort of landed on. In discussion through that, the hard part here is this is outside the natural flow of the way we typically do policy drafting. What you just saw play out with ICAD is your typical policy drafting. And so, and our policy even states that policy revisions are brought to the board by the district. They're vetted by the superintendent and his staff, and then brought to us for comment, edits, and then eventual approval. This is a little different in that the B policies speak directly to the board and how the board conducts its business. And so that was really the ultimate driving force behind this ad hoc committee, was having the board kind of more or less lead that policy drafting. So we really don't have great policy to address that. So we find ourselves in a bit of a conundrum. Secondly, when it comes to actual policy drafting, none of us are attorneys up here. And so really, we have to have some oversight, and we have to have someone walk with us through these policies to make sure that not only are they internally consistent with what we're drafting, but what would be considered to be externally consistent to South Carolina Code of Law. And so in doing so, I requested that Dr. Little reach out to attorney that we've worked with in the past, who has helped with some different things we have done, as well as South Carolina School Board Association, and really put together a memorandum of understanding of what that would look like scope-wise. And so in doing so, both of them came back. We then reviewed these. Obviously, we can't go through the details of executive session, but I can tell you that each of these were vetted appropriately. Secondly, we had procurement code vetted to make sure that we didn't have to go through procurement code to, or I shouldn't say that we didn't, but should we go through procurement to do this? it was determined no different than any other legal advice that we're getting. We don't solicit procurement per se for legal advice, which is what this would end up being. And then thirdly, when we look at it from a funding perspective, the funds that the board uses are really kind of comprised in kind of two areas within our budget. Some exist within the office of the superintendent. Some exist within the Board of Education policy or Board of Education budget line items. And so we wanted to make sure, obviously, that any money spent, that there was money appropriated to do such. And so ultimately, the committee landed on what we felt to be a decision. In doing so, it's hard to find clear direction, and honestly, I'm going to ask all of y'all, not for a vote, but more for opinion. You know, this is a situation where we don't have great policy regarding this. We're seeking legal advice, and so therefore we can independently reach out to an attorney. We can collectively reach out to an attorney. So there's, depending on which policy and which way you read the policy, you can arrive at 4 different conclusions. And so there's really not clarity there. In doing so, I thought that the committee being empowered by the board itself, inherently within that, does allow some freedom for us to have legal advice when it comes to policy drafting, since this is outside our norm. But in the event that that's not the case, I would propose that if it's the desire of the board, we can bring the formal recommendation to the board next board meeting for approval regarding the legal review that would occur of the policies that we are drafting over the course of the next year. And so that's where it kind of sits. So I would be interested to hear any feedback from the board.
Well, I'll just go first. The way I look at it is all of the committees of the board, the audit, the construction management, those, when we have contracts coming out of those committees, they come back to the board for a full vote. And I watched the ad hoc committee meeting, and I just assumed on the agenda, once you all, excuse me, decide on option A, I said, well, that'll be on the agenda, and I'll get to hear all about it. But then when I saw it was under business and not actually action, I was thinking, okay, maybe they just, I don't know. I was never thinking there was an option that when a committee entered into a contract, that it didn't come back before the board. And I don't know how that's laid out in state law, and our policy is completely unclear, and I trust this ad hoc committee to do what is right. And I know, Kyle, you've said this several times, and I feel the exact same way. It's not necessarily this board that we're concerned with. We're always looking to the future. So if you allow this ad hoc committee to enter into a contract without the vote of the full board, then who's to say another ad hoc committee won't decide that they need something different other than legal advice or policy revisions and enter into a contract for something and the board never hears about it?
And I think to address that directly to your question, that's the whole purpose of this ad hoc committee. You know, our policies are such that some are really good at demonstrating process, others are really weak at demonstrating process. And so for us, that's the challenge, is that we have to have policies that allow us to dictate process to therefore make future boards successful. And so as a part of that, that would be one of the questions to answer. As you've seen with our committee policy, it's very vague at best. Right. And so we don't have clarity on that. And so that would be within the scope of this ad hoc committee, is to answer that very question. And so coming out of this ad hoc committee, I would tell you that concern will be alleviated. But obviously, to initiate, you know, I certainly am open to any and all feedback regarding the initiation of continuing to do things the way we've kind of done them in the past, because that's really what it comes down to, because we don't.
Well, and Dr. Kite, can I just interject
Sure.
something real quick? So, and I did not attend the ad hoc committee. I'm not participating in it. But he and I talked, and he mentioned to me just the two entities that the ad hoc committee was considering. And then I'm not sure. I think maybe Ms. Halliday mentioned to me that y'all had or maybe I read the minutes from the meeting, and y'all had chosen SCSBA to do that.
Sure, sure.
Not only does our policies not give us guidance on this, but our district has never done this process before. And so I don't think either you or I were thinking, oh, well, we just didn't automatically go to, this needs to go to the board. But we have, as questions have come up this week, I think we both, via email from community members and Ms. Garris, like, okay, well, maybe, so this actually is on our agenda for December.
Sure.
Should we decide that we want to, because I agree that previous committees, whether it's the audit selection or the, construction selection or whatever, those decisions do come to the board, if nothing else for ratification, because we trust, like Ms. Garris said, we trust the ad hoc committee and the deliberations that you had. And so I think it would be appropriate for you just to bring that recommendation to us and for us as a full board to give a stamp of approval. But you're so right in saying that our policy doesn't really help us on this because there's not really a clear path.
No, we do have the historical context of exactly what you're talking about. But again, with this being a fairly new endeavor, it's not going to be immune from reflection. It's not going to be immune from questions, and I'm happy to answer any and all of those. Our desire is exactly what you're talking about, Ms. Garris, is to set this board up for current success, and then any and all future boards for success, particularly in light of what we've gone through over the past several years, and just what we've learned, and questions that we need to answer, quite frankly. Any other questions, concerns from the board itself?
Well, I just had a question. I know it was mentioned that this came out of the superintendent's account. So what does that have to do with the actual contract? I was just wondering why that was even taken into consideration, like what account it came out of.
Well, so number one, if it's my expectation as a part of my business that if I'm going to spend money, I'm going to make sure that it's properly allocated for. And so this review and this legal advice that we will receive does come with a price tag. And so we do have to exercise funds for that. But before doing so, I wanted to secure, in fact, that we did not need to come to the board for additional funding, that there existed funds within the scope of the board to cover the cost of this. And really, if you look at historical context to what you mentioned, when it comes to policy drafting, that typically has come through the Office of the Superintendent, because the policies are brought to us through the district. And so as a part of that, as we look at the funding, and in conversations with Dr. Little, there existed funds that were within the Office of the Superintendent budget to allow for this policy legal expertise to occur. Because quite frankly, I got nothing else. I mean, I don't know. There's not a line item that says legal advice for board members within our budget. And so, again, maybe this will help to clarify for us and future boards even budgetary questions.
I just want to thank you. I know this is a new process, having ad hoc committees, but I think you've done a great job as board chair, and I appreciate the fact that when there are questions floating around, you do what you do right now. You bring them to the board and you say, hey, what do y'all think? And I just appreciate it.
So just clarifying, as a ad hoc committee member, our plan is we're not going to meet the rest of November or December, because in December at our big board meeting, we're going to vote on using,
Correct. So our selection, and we'll obviously talk through the actual agenda item next time. So at this point, we would bring to the board for vote the ability to finalize a contract with the selection of option A from our previous. And we can certainly have additional discussion at that time regarding it.
okay, and then.
But don't worry about that time between Thanksgiving and Christmas. We're good.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Anything else for Dr. Guyton? All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you again to that committee for the work that you have begun. I feel like you're a tiny snowball at the top of the hill, and that's just going to keep rolling down and getting a bigger and bigger and bigger project. So thank you for serving on that committee.
I like to think more of that Price is Right. Remember the Price is Right guy? The little,
Oh,
the little ice, the mountain climber guy.
Yeah.
That's what I kind of
I know
like
what
to think.
you're
That's the
It's
analogy
not
I have.
Plinko where you're just going down and.
No,
Okay.
no, not Plinko.
All right. Thank you very much for doing that.